Lucy Letby was a neonatal nurse. She worked at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the United Kingdom. Her colleagues saw her as a dedicated professional, someone entrusted with the care of the most vulnerable patients. These were premature and sick babies, tiny lives dependent on modern medicine and skilled hands. Letby started her career there as a student nurse in 2011. She qualified and joined the neonatal unit as a full-time staff member. She was, by many accounts, a seemingly ordinary young woman doing an extraordinary job. Her life appeared unremarkable, centered on her work, her home, and her friends. No one suspected the darkness that prosecutors would later allege was hiding in plain sight within the sterile, brightly lit walls of the ward. The period between June 2015 and June 2016 marked a disturbing shift. The neonatal unit, a place of hope and healing, experienced a significant and alarming rise in unexpected infant deaths and sudden, life-threatening collapses. These were not babies who were expected to die. Many were stable or even improving when they suddenly deteriorated without a clear medical reason. Doctors and nurses on the unit grew increasingly concerned. The collapses were happening with a frequency that defied statistical probability and medical explanation. A sense of unease began to permeate the ward. The pattern was too persistent to be dismissed as a string of bad luck or a random cluster of unfortunate events. The initial response was to search for a cause. Was there an infection spreading through the unit? Was there a problem with equipment or medication protocols? Senior doctors began to notice a troubling correlation. Lucy Letby seemed to be on duty during many, if not all, of these sudden and inexplicable events. The correlation was initially just a whisper, a difficult-to-voice suspicion among colleagues who found it almost impossible to believe. The idea that a nurse, a caregiver, could be intentionally harming babies was a concept so monstrous it seemed to belong to fiction, not to the daily reality of a National Health Service hospital in a quiet English city. This growing unease led to the first formal steps. In late June 2016, after the deaths of two triplet boys in quick succession, consultants demanded that Letby be removed from clinical duties. The hospital management initially resisted this call, a decision that would later attract severe criticism. Letby was moved to a clerical role in July 2016, away from patient contact. The sudden collapses on the unit stopped. This cessation seemed to confirm the doctor's worst fears. An internal hospital review began, which would eventually lead to a full police investigation, codenamed Operation Hummingbird, launched in May 2017. The search for answers had officially begun, setting in motion a chain of events that would captivate and horrify the nation. The case against Lucy Letby was built not on a single piece of smoking gun evidence, but on a complex mosaic of circumstantial findings. The prosecution presented a timeline of events, linking Letby's presence to a series of collapses and deaths. The charges were devastating: murder and attempted murder of infants under her care. The methods alleged were varied and difficult to detect. Prosecutors argued that Letby used several means to inflict harm: injecting air into babies' bloodstreams or stomachs, poisoning them with insulin, deliberately overfeeding them with milk. These actions, the prosecution contended, were subtle enough to mimic natural medical crises, making them incredibly difficult to identify at the time. A significant part of the evidence came from medical tests and physical observations. In some cases, doctors noted unusual skin discoloration, a patchy, fleeting mottling that appeared on babies just before they collapsed. This was presented as a potential sign of an air embolism, an air bubble in the bloodstream. In two cases, blood tests revealed abnormally high levels of insulin that had not been prescribed. The prosecution argued this was a deliberate act of poisoning, as the insulin was synthetic and not produced by the baby's own bodies. These clinical findings formed the core of the medical argument that the collapses were not natural events, but the result of deliberate, harmful interference. The police investigation uncovered a trove of documents and digital data. Among the most haunting items were handwritten notes discovered at Letby's home. On one green sticky note she had written, "I am evil, I did this." I don't deserve to live. I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them. The prosecution presented these as literal confessions. The defense argued they were the anguished writings of a woman struggling with the trauma and stress of the events on the unit, a reflection of her feeling of inadequacy, not of guilt. Police also found that Letby had taken home hundreds of confidential patient handover sheets, and her phone records showed she had searched for the families of her alleged victims on social media. The paper trail, or lack thereof, also became a point of contention. The prosecution highlighted that medical records were sometimes found to be incomplete or altered for the periods surrounding the incidents. Handover sheets, which are crucial for communicating a patient's status between nursing shifts, were sometimes missing for the babies who had collapsed. The prosecution suggested this was a deliberate effort by Letby to cover her tracks, to remove documentation that might incriminate her. The events at the Countess of Chester Hospital unfolded against a backdrop of internal conflict and management failures. Long before the police were involved, senior consultants on the neonatal unit began to raise alarms. They held multiple meetings with hospital executives. They presented concerns about a spike in deaths and the correlation with a specific staff member's presence. They repeatedly asked for that nurse to be removed pending investigation. The doctors felt their warnings were not taken seriously. Managers appeared more focused on protecting the hospital's reputation than addressing threats to patient safety. Management's response was slow and, critics say, deeply flawed. Rather than an immediate independent review, executives suggested the concerns might be bullying. Consultants were even asked to apologize for their accusations. Institutional resistance delayed meaningful action for months. After a trial that lasted for 10 months, one of the longest in British legal history, the jury at Manchester Crown Court delivered its verdicts in August 2023. The process was painstaking, the jury having to consider each charge separately for each individual baby. The outcome was a complex mix of judgments. The jury found Lucy Letby guilty on 7 counts of murder involving 7 different babies. They also found her guilty on 7 counts of attempted murder involving 6 other infants. These verdicts painted a picture of a serial killer who had systematically targeted vulnerable newborns over a year-long period. However, the jury's decisions were not unanimous. They found Letby not guilty on 2 counts of attempted murder and were unable to reach a verdict on 6 further counts related to 4 other babies. Following the guilty verdicts, Mr. Justice Goss handed down the most severe sentence under English law. Lucy Letby was sentenced to a whole life order. She will spend the rest of her life in prison with no possibility of parole. The Lucy Letby trial was defined by a profound disagreement among medical experts, among scientific experts. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimony of expert witnesses, including the renowned pediatrician Dr. Dewey Evans. These experts argued the cluster of deaths and collapses could not be explained by natural causes. They pointed to unusual clinical signs, the fleeting skin mottling, the inexplicable presence of air in babies' bodies on X-rays, as positive evidence of intentional harm. The defense presented its own team of experts who challenged those interpretations. They said the prosecution's medical evidence was ambiguous and open to alternative explanations. For example, they contended the skin discoloration could come from infection or other natural complications in very premature babies. They questioned the reliability of diagnosing an air embolism from X-rays taken after death. The statistical evidence was another major point of contention. The prosecution highlighted the extreme improbability of a single nurse being present for so many collapses by chance. Independent statisticians criticized that reasoning, calling it the prosecutor's fallacy. They warn that post hoc patterns can mislead. Association is not, by itself, proof of causation. In the wake of the verdicts, the case of Lucy Letby has left a long and complicated trail. The legal processes are far from over. The investigative processes are far from over. A major independent public inquiry, the Thirlwall Inquiry, was established in 2024. Its purpose is not to re-examine the criminal convictions. It will investigate the wider circumstances at the Countess of Chester Hospital. It aims to understand how Letby was able to commit these crimes without being stopped sooner. It aims to scrutinize the actions of hospital management. The inquiry will provide recommendations to improve patient safety and governance across the NHS. Lucy Letby has consistently maintained her innocence. Her legal team has pursued avenues for appeal. In May 2024, she lost her second attempt to bring an appeal. The Court of Appeal refused her application, saying there was no reasonably arguable ground. Despite this setback, her case has been taken up by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, the CCRC. The CCRC reviews potential miscarriages of justice and can refer a case back to the Court of Appeal if new evidence or compelling legal argument emerges. The case continues to be the subject of intense public and professional debate. There is a division between those certain of her guilt and those who harbor doubts. This debate touches on the use of expert evidence in court, on the interpretation of complex medical data, and on the power of statistical correlation. For the families of the victims, the aftermath is a painful and ongoing reality. The verdicts brought a form of legal closure. Appeals and inquiries keep the story alive in the headlines. These processes force families to relive their trauma repeatedly. Ultimately, the case leaves a legacy of profound and unresolved questions. How could a nurse, trained to heal, become a murderer of the most helpless patients? Why were initial warnings from senior doctors not heeded by hospital management? Was the complex medical evidence interpreted correctly? Is there a possibility that a miscarriage of justice has occurred? Even with a whole life sentence being served, the story is not over. It continues to resonate, a chilling reminder of the fragility of trust. It is a reminder of the devastating consequences when caregiving becomes a cover for cruelty.